So finally, during the next 30 or so minutes, we will be dealing mostly with economics. But before doing so, I just want to once again introduce my book, Economics, the Social Order, and the Rumpa Revolution, which can be purchased from Amazon.com, to viewers just in case they're jumping directly to these videos. So again, why do we want to understand economics? We want to understand economics so that we overcome our fear of individual economic freedom. And we can also overcome this propensity to believe that we can use the government and its bureaucracies and regulatory tentacles to design a better society. So having briefly mentioned this, I want to read the quote that I have included in the book's cover by 1974 Nobel laureate in economics Friedrich Hayek, which reads, "The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design." So again, the task of economics is not to help bureaucrats and the public design these public sector bureaucracies that are going to supposedly make society better. It is to help us understand that those bureaucracies do not make the world better, that the social order, what really creates a prosperous social order, is this impersonal economic forces which require individual economic freedom. And that whenever we try to use the government to design or improve upon society, we just end up making things worse. Now, so in this introduction to economics, I will just basically go over a very few simple concepts, and then we'll build on them to discuss a couple of bigger concepts, and that'll be it pretty much. So the first concept we want to discuss is that of wealth. Wealth is just anything that is useful to us, and at a very fundamental level, wealth is just a transformation of matter from states where it is less useful to states where it is more useful. For example, what really is a car? A car is just a transformation of natural resources that were on the ground somewhere, and then have been transformed into the car which we consider to be wealth. What about the food that we eat? Food is also just a transformation of matter. At some point, various elements were on the ground somewhere, but thanks to nature's working, plants incorporated those elements into their body, and then that became the wealth in terms of plants which we ate. And if you're eating an animal, the transformation of matter just takes a little longer, right? The very same elements that were on the ground and were then incorporated into the plants, the animals ate those elements, and then those were incorporated into the animals' bodies, and we ate the animals. So services can also be wealth. For example, haircuts and medical advice, that's wealth as well. And those two can be seen as transformations of matter. When someone cuts your hair, matter is being transformed. The hair used to be stuck to your head, and now it's no longer there. And thanks to medical advice, the bacteria that might have been ailing you has changed its state. Maybe you took some medicine that destroyed the bacteria, or maybe you just pooped it out of the system or whatever. That is still a transformation of matter. So wealth is any transformation of matter, anything that interacts with the world in a way that we desire, that is wealth. So it can be tangible goods like cars and airplanes, as well as services. Now the next concept we want to discuss is this ongoing cycle of production and consumption. Production is the sequence of steps that we take to create wealth, right? To transform matter from a state that is less useful to one that is more useful. And consumption is taking that wealth and transforming it in a way that is no longer as useful to us. For example, when we produce a car, somehow we are involved in taking that matter and transforming it into the car. But then when we consume the car, we drive it long enough, it starts breaking down too much to the point where it's no longer as useful to us as a car. So we say that the car has been consumed. Now, this doesn't mean that the car just ceases to exist. It just means that that wealth has changed to the point where it's no longer as useful. We know that we can take a car once it gets really old and then sell it for scraps, or just take the materials and recycle them. So in the case of food, the farmer plants the seed, he goes through various processes to create the food, so he increases the world's economic pie of food supply. But then we eat the food, and the food ceases to exist as well. It is transformed. Our bodies use it, we defecate some of it or whatever. So again, very simple concept, right? We can see the economic pie is constantly being increased by production, and at the same time it is being decreased by consumption. Now, every time we work, we increase the economic pie by a crucial ingredient, which is our labor. Our labor is then combined with the labor of other human beings and various tools and so on to help us create all other kinds of wealth. Someone like a barber, he directly uses his labor to produce his haircut services. A doctor does something along similar lines. But someone who might work in an auto assembly plant, it's a little more complicated, right? He adds his labor to society, and then we can see how it is combined with various machinery and tools to ultimately somewhere in the pipeline to actually create the car. Now the next concept we want to discuss is that of human action. Why do we act? We act to go from a state that our minds consider to be inferior to one that is superior. For example, let's just say you're reading a book. Why are you reading a book? Because obviously you feel like from all the things that you could be doing with your time, reading the book happens to be the best one at the time. Now let's just say that some time goes by and you start getting hungry, right? Your biochemistry figures out that it's low on energy and your brain starts telling you this little signal that says, okay, you're hungry. So, but maybe you keep reading because you still find the book more interesting than your hunger pangs. But enough time goes by and then the priority changes. The moment you have decided that you feel more hungry, you reach a point where you feel like you're much better off getting up and preparing a meal than you are still reading the book. So at that moment, you act in a different way. You go, you create your sandwich, and you eat your sandwich. Once you're in the well-fed state, then maybe you go back to reading the book or doing who knows what else. So the bottom line is that human beings are always acting because our brains are always looking at the world around us and thinking of what is the best course of action to take. We're always moving from states that are inferior to us to states that are superior. Pretty obvious, right? The next couple of concepts we want to look at, I'll kind of introduce the two of them in one shot. They are value and trade. Where do things get their value from? Value depends on individual human brains and how useful those things that we are valuing are to our plans. The classic example is what is referred to as the diamond water paradox. Let's just say that you have this big bag of diamonds and you're in the middle of a desert, but you're very thirsty and you're going to die of thirst if you do not get a gallon of water that'll help you make it to the next town. Now there's a man who's coming in a camel and he has many gallons of water. Now you have this bag full of diamonds and he has a bunch of gallons. Since you're very thirsty, you value one of his gallons of water a lot more than you value one of your precious diamonds. And since that is the case, and from the man's perspective, he has a bunch of gallons of water, he can make it to the next town without any problems, and he definitely values the diamonds that you have a lot more than one of his gallons of water. So the two of you make a trade. You give him one of your diamonds, he gives you a gallon of water. You get the gallon of water because you value it more than the diamond you're giving up. And he values the diamond of water, he values the diamond more than the gallon of water he's giving up. So therefore the trade can take place, and both of you move from an inferior state to a superior state, given your own individual brains. Now, once you make it to a city, you will probably not want to trade another diamond for a gallon of water, because now the situation has changed. What your mind, the plans that your mind can accomplish have changed in a way that the diamond is much more valuable than the gallon of water. So, bottom line, right? One can see how the value of things ultimately depends on how they fit into our various plans of action. Another example is, for example, eating a hamburger, right? At some point you're hungry and you will gladly trade one of your dollars for a hamburger. From the restaurant's perspective, the restaurant values your dollar more than the hamburger it's giving up. And from your perspective, you value the hamburger more than the dollar you're giving up. Therefore, when the two parties meet, they can trade, and each party moves from an inferior state to a superior state. Now, once you eat the hamburger, you might no longer feel like trading an additional dollar for a hamburger is in your best interest. Therefore, you no longer make the trade. So again, we can see how we're constantly acting, and trade helps both parties move from an inferior to a superior state. Next, let us combine the simple concepts to come up with a bigger example that will show how much a society works. If you look at society from high above, it looks like a human ant farm, which is in a constant cycle of production and consumption. Well, if you zoom into a small section of that human ant farm, you're going to find companies, which can be seen as mini human ant farms that are also involved in this cycle of production and consumption. Let's think about a mining company. This particular mining company has yearly costs of about $1 million. Those costs are going to lead to consumption from the economic pie. For example, the employees will take their paychecks and they will trade that money for cars, food, energy, etc., which will be consumed from the economic pie. Now, on the other hand, the company is involved in production. It is transforming matter from a state that is less useful to one that is more useful. In this mining company's example, it is taking rocks that are on the ground where they cannot be used, and it is taking them, chopping them up in various ways, and putting them in trains where they are useful to society.